Okay, hello guys. So in typical laminate device, you have minimum 5 layers. You have two rigids on the top and bottom. You have the flex layer in the middle, and you use two adhesive layers to glue all of them together. So usually what we use in our lab and you're gonna use in your class is some plastics as flexible layer. They are really cheap compared to other options. So we use cardboards for initial prototypes. If you go for final ones, you can also use fiberglass, acrylic, or even carbon fiber.
Wood as well.
And wood as well. The other option you have for your flex material is using fabric. So fabric is more durable, but it doesn't give you guys stiffness. That guy, if you use a thick one, it will give you stiffness as well. And this is the adhesive layer we have. This adhesive is temperature activated. You have to laminate it using the laminator here or in Innovation Hub. This is actually the most expensive one, and one thing you have to remember is that it's really hard to save the scrap of this guy, because if you have small parts of this, they usually get dirty. You have to throw them out. So please try to be considerate in using this one especially. And this is like, each roll is about $200, so it's really expensive compared to other material we use. These are the typical materials. We're gonna talk about the laminating process later. So in terms of planning your laser cutting layers and stuff, I suggest this approach. So you start with your flex layer, and then based on flex layer you cut the adhesive that you need, then you do the adhesive layer, and at the end you do the rigid layer. By doing that and knowing the positions of your cuts, you can use the sheet of your rigid layer for the final cut as well, which saves you material. The downside is that you cannot start laminating right away. You have to wait for everything to be finished, because you usually start with doing your rigid in lamination. This was alternative 1. Alternative 2 is just start with the rigid and then adhesive, so you can start laminating and then get to the flex. The only thing is that because you remove the materials, you have to put a clean sheet of rigid material and do your final pass one time to get a placeholder for your laminated device. Just a little bit of material is wasted, so it depends on your time. The other alternative is that most of the time, your adhesive and rigid layer, they have the same cut. So you can actually laminate your adhesive and rigid before starting laser cutting, and just laminate them together and then do the laser cut. It will save you time, but it has its own problems. It might curl up everything, so you never get a clean, flat cut, and again you have to make sure that they're exactly the same. So we are now starting printing the different layers for our robot. You can start with flex or adhesive. I prefer to keep the rigid for last. I'm gonna explain why when we get to it. So you start with, for example, flex here, and you have to glue it down sometimes because it's really light and the air pressure and the vent sucking would move it around. So tape it down, and then remember to move your laser cutter to the position that you want it to print, and do the focus. When everything is ready, you can send the file and start printing. So before I start printing, remember you have to turn on the air pressure and the fans. Can someone please? Yeah. For the laser cutter to be able to print, you have to close the door, otherwise it will not do that. It has these lights here, it shows So that's important. You have to wait for this guy to start sucking the air, otherwise you will have smokes. And when you get enough, you just have to find the job and hit green. So now we have our materials cut. We have the flex layer, we have the adhesive layers, and we also have the rigid layer. Now if you remember to flip one of the layers in your adhesive one, which I recommend for you guys, is you can now start attaching these two rigid bodies to the adhesive and laminate them together. That's why we say flip it. If you flip it, you can do both rigids and adhesive at the same time. If you don't do it, you have to go one by one. To do that, you're gonna use some pins like this, and you will always put down the more flimsy, flexible layer down like this. For example, here we have layer 1, right? So to layer 1, we're gonna use layer 0, and we're gonna align the ridings with each other, and then you start from the important parts like the hinge positions. You align them and you push them down, and then from center you go to the sides. Now remember, when you want to remove this, never remove the whole part because they're gonna delaminate. Always remove the pins and then try to make them consistent, really stick together. We can use this with the rollers. This is what we use in our lab. So you have a really nice connection. Now this is ready to go to the laminator. Okay, so we have now attached the adhesive and rigid layers together. The adhesive is temperature activated, so it's not completely glued to each other. No, now you can move them in the laminator. The temperature and the time of lamination, you have to check them with the manual of the adhesive layer. You have to check the data sheet, and then you can put them in laminator and laminate them together. So for our material, it should be around 225 to 30, and it should need 2 minutes. Now what I do 1 minute this side, 1 minute the other side. It's up to you guys how you want to do it. One thing is about the pressure you need on top. Always have pressure, but not too much, especially when you are going towards the layer, like when you have 5 layers on top of each other. If you have too much pressure, because it's coming just from one side, the layers will slide on top of each other and your part will go really bad. So just a little bit pressure is enough. Okay, now we have put them in laminator, brought them back, and give them a little bit time to cool down. Okay, when they are cooled down, we're gonna now go for the flex layer. So you're gonna put out again the flexible part, the flex layer. It doesn't matter which side, you have to just select one of the other 2 parts to go with that. So because I have the layer 1 here, this one doesn't work, so I have to go with this one. Now what you have to do, you have to somehow get this backing out, like here. And you can see that this is now the adhesive layer that is stuck to the rigid part. And now this backing easily separates. Good feeling actually, it's like new phones, you know. And then you have to again put them back and align them. Just go around your hinges because it easily break, and then align everything back. And when we are finished aligning them, we have to put this back into the laminator. This is aligned, we have stuck it together. We have to put it in laminator now. Don't worry about the little bit curve you see. It's the nature of using cardboards. It always happens. It's no big deal. It usually goes away when you have all the layers on top of each other, so don't worry about it. Okay, now this one is ready. We have to connect back this layer. The same way, we have to just align them, put them on top of each other, and then laminate them. Have in mind that laminating this one, because you don't have a straight touch between the laminator and the adhesive layer, might take a little bit longer if you want to make sure they actually stick together. So just give them a little bit more of time, or maybe flip them two times, give it three rounds, and after that everything should be ready and we can do the final cut to release the material. So when you're finished with your laminating, your device is ready to be for final cut. So you have to have a final path to release the device, right? If you align the position or set the position of your rigid files, rigid cuts, it's the same with the final cuts. You can use your old layer sheet of material for rigid for placing down your final cut. If that's not the case, you have to do final cut on a sheet of material, so it gives you the placeholder, and then you can put this in the right spot. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put the device down. We're gonna make sure that we can rig the layer, everything is aligned. And now we have to do two things. First of all, we have to tape it down because of this little bit curly cylinder. And we're gonna refocus the lens because the thickness of material is not different. Okay, so now we are finished with final task. You can release the device. Make sure all the parts are disconnected. All the hinges are clean. You might need to push them a little bit out. And then your device is ready. You have this nice little 5-bar mechanism that is rigid. This one because I use a thick material for flex. But you can always play with the stiffness. Okay, when you're finished with your laminating and all your manufacturing process, remember two things. First of all, turn off all the fans and everything associated with your laser cutter. Usually close the door and remove your material. And the second one, always remember to turn off your laminator, otherwise it's gonna be turned on for a long time. It's a fire hazard, so remember that. Okay, so in terms of planning your laser cutting layers and stuff, I suggest this approach. So you start with your flex layer, and then based on flex layer you cut the adhesive that you need, then you do the adhesive layer, and at the end you do the rigid layer. By doing that and knowing the positions of your cuts, you can use the sheet of your rigid layer for the final cut as well, which saves you material. The downside is that you cannot start laminating right away. You have to wait for everything to be finished because you usually start with doing your rigid in lamination. This was alternative 1. Alternative 2 is just start with the rigid and then adhesive, so you can start laminating and then get to the flex. The only thing is that because you remove the materials, you have to put a clean sheet of rigid material and do your final pass one time to get a placeholder for your laminated device. Just a little bit of material is wasted, so it depends on your time. The other alternative is that most of the time, your adhesive and rigid layer, they have the same cut. So you can actually laminate your adhesive and rigid before starting laser cutting, and just laminate them together and then do the laser cut. It will save you time, but it has its own problems. It might curl up everything, so you never get a clean, flat cut. And again, you have to make sure that they are exactly the same.